The auctioneer's gavel cracked against oak wood so like a bone snapping in two. Sold to Lord Caspian for 300 sovereigns. The Omega in blue stepped forward. The woman stumbled down from the platform, head bowed, hands trembling, as Lord Caspian's guards gripped her arms and led her away. She didn't look back. None of them ever did. The Grand Hall of Greymore Castle had never been designed for this. The soaring stone arches the ancient tapestries depicting glorious battles, the throne where kings had once dispensed justice. All of it bore witness now to something far less noble. The mating auction, where unmated wolves came when every other option had died. Sloane Thornwood stood in the line of remaining women, her entire body concealed beneath a hooded cloak of heavy black wool. The fabric was so thick that even in the warmth of the crowded hall, she felt nothing but the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders, on her chest, on the secret she could never expose. Around her, the other women at least showed their faces. The one to her left had been beautiful once you could still see it in the elegant bones of her face, though time and 3 broken betrothals had carved lines around her eyes and mouth. She wept silently, tears cutting tracks through carefully applied cosmetics. To Sloane's right stood a woman with a livid scar running from temple to jawline, her chin raised in defiance despite the whispers that followed her like carry-on birds. And beyond her, another woman stared vacantly ahead, hands curved protectively over her swollen belly. Pregnant and abandoned. They all had their tragedies, their reasons for being here. But Sloane was the only one who hid. The whispers about her were the loudest. What's wrong with that one? Why won't she show her face? Must be hideous, burned maybe, or diseased. I heard she's a witch, that's why she covers the mark. Sloane's hands clenched beneath her cloak. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. The truth would terrify them more than any rumor. The auctioneer cleared his throat, consulting his ledger, with the enthusiasm of a man reading a tax document. Next, female age 24. Bloodline. He paused, lips curling with barely concealed disgust. Uncertain. No confirmed pack lineage, no dowry, no holdings. Translation worthless. Bidding starts at 50 sovereigns. Silence crashed through the hall like a wave. 50 sovereigns. For any woman, even one as obviously defective as Sloane, it was an insult. It was the price you'd pay for a decent horse. Maybe. Sloane felt the weight of her father's gaze from where he stood near the platform's edge. Bancroft Thornwood, Lord of Thornhill Manor, a man whose title meant far more than his character deserved. He stood beside her half-sister Ravenna, both of them watching Sloane with matching expressions of cold satisfaction. Bancroft had made his position clear before they'd left for the castle that morning. His voice still echoed in her memory. If no one chooses you tonight, Sloane, I am within my legal rights to sell you as chattel. There's a rogue pack at the border. They pay 350 sovereigns for a witch to keep as a slave. I suspect they won't care what's under your hood. The auctioneer waited. No hands rose. No voices called out bids. 50 sovereigns, he repeated, voice echoing off stone walls. Surely someone... The massive oak doors at the hall's entrance exploded inward with a boom that silenced every conversation, every breath. AlphaKing Sterling Greymore stepped through them like winter personified. The assembly's reaction was immediate and visceral. Every person in the hall either bowed or took an involuntary step backward. Some did both. This wasn't the polite deference shown to nobility. This was the primal response of prey animals recognizing an apex predator in their midst. Sterling stood 6.5 feet tall, broad-shouldered, beneath a black cloak that fell to his boot heels. His hair was pale gold, almost silver in the torchlight, falling past his shoulders in a way that should have looked soft, but instead appeared sharp as cut glass. But it was his eyes that made even the bravest wolves lower their gazes. Gray, cold, clear, absolutely merciless. The auctioneer nearly fell from his platform. Your Majesty, we are honored by your presence. I assure you we did not expect... Continue. Sterling's voice cut through the stammering like a blade through silk. Not loud, not aggressive, simply absolute. The auctioneer's throat worked soundlessly for 3 full seconds before words emerged. Your Majesty, we are in the middle of that, is to say we have several fine women still available, and if you would care to, I said continue. The command brooked no argument. The auctioneer's face went pale, then red, then pale again. He looked down at his ledger as if the words there might save him. Sterling began walking, not to the platform, not to inspect the line of women like livestock at a market. He walked with purpose, his boots striking the stone floor, with measured, deliberate steps that seemed to count down to something inevitable. He passed the woman who'd been weeping. Didn't glance at her, past the scarred woman who'd raised her chin in defiance. Didn't slow, past the pregnant Omega, the middle-aged widow, the woman with noble blood but no dowry. He stopped directly in front of Sloane. The world contracted to the space between them. Sloane couldn't see his face through the heavy fabric of her hood, but she felt his presence like standing too close to a frozen lake, the cold radiating off him in waves that defied everything she knew about alphas. They were supposed to run hot, burn with barely contained heat. Sterling was winter itself. This one, his voice was quiet, final. I'll take her. The hall erupted. Nobles gasped and whispered and turned to each other with expressions of shock that bordered on horror. The auctioneer opened and closed his mouth like a landed fish. Even the other women in line stared, their own desperate situations momentarily forgotten in the face of this incomprehensible development. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the entire kingdom, a man who could have any woman, any princess, any noble daughter from here to the sea, and he'd chosen the hooded woman, the one nobody wanted, the one nobody would look at. Your Majesty, the auctioneer's voice shook. Forgive me, but you haven't seen her face. You don't know what might be. I don't need to see her face. Sterling didn't turn to look at the auctioneer. His attention remained fixed on Sloane, though she knew he couldn't see her either through the thick fabric. I know what I want. He shifted slightly, angling his body so his words would reach Sloane but not carry to the gawking crowd. Do you consent to be my wife? The question was so quiet, so unexpected, that for a moment Sloane thought she'd imagined it. Kings didn't ask permission. They commanded. They took. They demanded, but Sterling waited, patient, still, like he had all the time in the world for her answer. Sloane's mind raced. This made no sense. Why would he choose her? What game was being played here? But beneath the confusion, beneath the fear, a single thought burned bright and clear. This was her only chance to escape. She nodded. Once. Definite. Say it aloud, Sterling said softly, so there can be no question of your choice. Sloane's voice emerged rough from disuse and shock. I consent. The words seemed to satisfy him. He turned to face the assembly, his cloak sweeping in a dark arc. The auction is concluded. This woman is now under my protection. Anyone who questions this will answer to me personally. The threat in those words wasn't veiled at all. It was naked as a blade. Bancroft stepped forward from the crowd, his face purple with suppressed rage. Your Majesty, I must protest. As her father, I have certain rights. You have no rights over her anymore. Sterling's gaze fixed on Bancroft with the kind of attention a wolf gives a rabbit just before the strike. You brought your daughter to auction. You forfeited your claim the moment you put her on that platform. She owes me, Bancroft's voice rose, losing the veneer of civility. 8,470 pounds in debts. I am owed. You'll have your money before sunrise. Sterling's interruption was so casual it was almost bored. My steward will deliver it to Thornhill Manor. Consider our business concluded. He held out his hand to Sloane. Through her cloak, she could barely make out the shape of it, large, long-fingered, steady. She placed her trembling hand in his. The moment their palms touched, even through the fabric of her cloak and whatever glove he wore, something happened. Not painful, not frightening, just awareness, like the first crack of ice on a frozen pond in early spring. So subtle you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. But Sloane was paying attention. And judging from the way Sterling's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around hers, so was he. He led her from the hall in silence. Behind them, the whispers rose to a roar. The castle corridors passed in a blur of torchlight and stone. Guards bowed as they walked past. Servants pressed themselves against walls to make way. Sloane kept her head down, hood pulled low, acutely aware of Sterling's hand still holding hers. He didn't speak, didn't explain. Just walked with that same measured pace that somehow made everyone else seem frantic in comparison. They climbed stairs, turned down hallways, passed through arched doorways and under ancient battlements until Sloane had completely lost her bearings. Finally, Sterling stopped before a heavy wooden door carved with intricate patterns of wolves and moons. These will be your chambers. He released her hand and Sloane was surprised by the immediate sense of loss. You'll find everything you need inside. My rooms adjoin yours through that door. He gestured to a smaller door set into the wall, but I won't enter without permission. Sloane stared at the door, then at him, though she could see only the barest outline of his form through her hood. Your Majesty, I don't understand. Why blah? The contract will be drawn up tomorrow. His voice remained neutral, but something in it made Sloane think of ice cracking under too much weight. We'll discuss terms then. For tonight, rest. You're safe here. Safe. The word felt foreign. Sloane couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe. Sterling turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. What is your name? Your given name, not whatever title your father forced on you. Sloane, she whispered. Sloane Thornwood. Sloane. The way he said it was different from how anyone else ever had. Like he was tasting the syllables, finding meaning in them. Tomorrow, then. He left and Sloane stood alone in the corridor for a long moment before finally pushing open the door to her new chambers. The room beyond stole her breath. It was larger than the entire servants' quarters at Thornhill Manor. A canopied bed dominated one wall draped in deep blue velvet. A fireplace crackled with warmth. Real glass windows. Glass looked out over darkened gardens. And the floor was carpeted, not cold stone. Sloane stepped inside, closing the door behind her with shaking hands. Only then in complete privacy did she reach up and push back her hood. The face that emerged was young, unmarred by scars or disease, or any of the horrific deformities the auction-goers had imagined. Pale skin, dark hair, eyes that shifted between gray and blue, depending on the light. But there, stark against her forehead, just above her eyebrows, was the mark that had defined her entire life. A cross, black as pitch, branded into her skin not by hot iron but by magic itself, the mark of a witch whose power had been sealed. The mark of someone dangerous, criminal, less than human. Sloane touched it with gentle fingers, tracing the familiar shape. 11 years she'd borne this mark. 11 years since the night everything had changed. She was 13 when the fire magic first manifested. Just a spark, nothing more, a candle flame that jumped from wick to tablecloth when her emotions ran too high. But that spark had been enough to reveal what her mother's affair had supposedly passed down to her. Magic, witch blood, abomination. Her father had acted swiftly, found someone to seal her power before it could fully develop. The ritual had been agony. They'd carved the mark into her forehead while chanting in languages Sloane didn't understand, and when it was done, the fire that lived in her veins went silent. Locked away behind walls of magic she couldn't breach. But the mark remained, visible proof of what she was. And then 5 years later, Blake Alford had died. The memory still made Sloane's chest tighten. Blake, her betrothed, not a man she loved. Their engagement had been arranged, practical, nothing more. But he'd been kind to her, had treated her like a person rather than a shameful secret, and then he'd fallen in love with Ravenna. Beautiful, legitimate Ravenna, the daughter their father actually claimed. The one who'd never had to hide, never had to bow her head, never had to pretend she didn't exist. Blake and Ravenna had planned to run away together. Sloane had known about it, had even felt a strange relief if Blake left. She wouldn't have to marry someone who loved another. But Blake never made it out of Thornhill Manor. They found him in the West Wing, in a room that should have been empty. His body was burned beyond recognition, but somehow nothing else in the room had caught fire. Just him. Just his flesh and bones reduced to ash and charred meat. And Sloane had been in the manor that night, had argued with Blake earlier that evening, had been angry, hurt, humiliated. Everyone assumed the same thing: the witch had lost control. The sealed power had leaked through. She'd killed him in jealous rage. Sloane had screamed her innocence, had sworn she'd done nothing, that her magic was sealed, that she couldn't have done this even if she'd wanted to. No one believed her. Her father had used the incident to have her formally marked as a dangerous witch. The cross on her forehead went from a simple sealing mark to a brand of criminality. And from that day forward, she'd been forced to cover her face entirely, to hide the proof of what she was. For 6 years, she'd lived that way, hooded, silent, working herself to exhaustion for debts that somehow only grew larger no matter how much she labored. Her father had found new charges to add every month: food, shelter, the cost of the sealing ritual, interest that compounded and multiplied until the sum was impossible: £8,470, more money than Sloane could earn in 3 lifetimes. She'd been trapped, no way out, no hope of escape. Until tonight, until a king with winter in his eyes had chosen her for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. A soft knock at the door made Sloane jerk her hood back up, hard hammering. "My lady," a woman's voice, gentle and cultured. "May I enter? His Majesty sent me to attend you." Sloane's hands shook as she made sure the hood completely obscured her face. "Come in." The door opened to reveal a woman of perhaps 50, dressed in the simple but well-made clothing of upper household staff. She had kind eyes and smile lines around her mouth. "I'm Miriam, my lady, head of the household staff." She curtsied, which made Sloane deeply uncomfortable. No one had ever curtsied to her before. I've drawn you a bath, and there are fresh night clothes laid out. Is there anything else you require? I know. Thank you. The words felt strange in Sloane's mouth. When was the last time someone had asked what she required? Miriam's expression softened. You must be exhausted, poor thing. That auction is a terrible ordeal for anyone. She moved toward the bathing room, gesturing for Sloane to follow. His Majesty was quite specific in his instructions. You're to want for nothing, and anyone who treats you with anything less than the utmost respect will answer to him personally. The bathing room was warm with steam rising from a large copper tub. Rose petals floated on the surface of the water. Clean towels were stacked nearby. Everything was so far removed from the cold bucket baths Sloane was used to that she almost couldn't process it. I'll leave you to bathe in privacy, Miriam said. Ring the bell if you need anything at all. And my lady, welcome to Greymore. I think you'll find things are different here. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Sloane stood alone in the steam-filled room, staring at the bath like it might be a trap. This couldn't be real. Couldn't be happening. Any moment she'd wake up back in the cold servants' quarters at Thornhill Manor, with Ravenna screaming for her to bring breakfast. But the water remained hot. The rose petals continued their gentle float, and slowly, carefully, Sloane began to undress. The clothes came off in layers. The heavy cloak, the rough wool dress beneath, the undergarments that had been washed so many times they were more holes than fabric. Finally, she was bare. She caught a glimpse of herself in the large mirror and immediately looked away. She knew what was there, the cross on her forehead, yes, but also the other marks. The thin white scars on her arms from Ravenna's accidents with silver knives. The burn marks on her hands from kitchen work. The general thinness of someone who'd spent years eating whatever was left after everyone else had finished. Sloane slipped into the bath and nearly gasped. The water was perfect. Hot, but not scalding, scented with roses and something else, lavender maybe. It was the most luxurious thing she'd ever experienced. She let herself sink down until the water reached her chin, and for the first time in 11 years, Sloane allowed herself to cry. Not harsh, racking sobs, just quiet tears that mixed with the bath water and disappeared. Tears for all the years of suffering. For Blake's death and the accusations she'd never been able to disprove. For her mother who died when Sloane was too young to really remember her. For the childhood stolen by her father's cruelty and Ravenna's casual sadism. And somewhere beneath the grief, a tiny spark of something else. Something fragile and frightening and precious. Hope. Morning came too quickly. Sloane woke in the massive bed, disoriented by the softness of the mattress, the weight of actual blankets rather than the single threadbare sheet she was used to. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, and panic flared hot in her chest. Then memory returned. The auction, Sterling, the promise of a contract. A knock at the door made her scramble for her cloak, pulling the hood up before calling out, "Enter." Miriam came in bearing a tray laden with more food than Sloane usually saw in a week. Fresh bread, honey butter, sliced fruit, cheese, cold meat. The scent made her stomach clench with hunger. "Good morning, my lady. His Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber at noon. That gives you 3 hours." Miriam set the tray on a small table near the window. "I've laid out appropriate clothing for a meeting with the king and his advisors. Nothing too formal, but suitable for your station." My station. What was her station now? She was the king's, what chosen future wife? Sloane had no frame of reference for this. "Thank you," she managed. Miriam curtsied again and left. Sloane stared at the food for a long moment before her hunger won out over her confusion. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. Real butter. Fresh bread that was still slightly warm. Fruit that wasn't bruised or beginning to rot. It was the best meal of her life. The clothing Miriam had selected was simple but finely made. A dress of deep forest green, far nicer than anything Sloane had ever worn. She pulled it on over her shift, then hesitated before the mirror. She couldn't go to meet the king and his council with her face showing. The contract hadn't been signed yet. She was still just the hooded woman from the auction. The moment anyone saw her, everything would fall apart. Sloane pulled the hood back up, making sure every inch of her face was concealed. Then she sat down to wait. When the knock came at noon precisely, Sloane's hands were trembling. A young guard stood in the corridor, his expression carefully neutral. "My lady, if you'll follow me." The walk to the council chamber felt like a march to execution. Every step echoed too loud. Every breath came too shallow. Sloane's mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. What if Sterling had changed his mind? What if the council refused to allow him to marry a hooded stranger? What if her father had found some legal recourse to reclaim her, the council chamber doors? were massive oak carved with the Greymore family crest, a wolf standing beneath a full moon. The guard pushed them open and announced her in a voice that carried through the cavernous space. Lady Sloane Thornwood. Lady, as if she had any right to that title. The chamber was dominated by a long table of dark wood polished to a mirror shine. 5 men sat along one side, clearly the king's advisors, all of them old enough to have served his father. At the head of the table sat Sterling, his pale hair pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of his cheekbones and jaw. He didn't smile when he saw her, didn't frown either. His expression remained perfectly neutral. Sit. He gestured to a chair near him, not quite beside him, but close enough that the arrangement suggested intimacy. Sloane sat grateful for the chair's support. Her legs had started to shake somewhere around the third step into the room, and there, standing near the far wall like a spider waiting to strike, was her father. Bancroft Thornwood looked exactly as Sloane remembered from last night, purple-faced with suppressed rage, his expensive clothing unable to hide the meanness that radiated from him like heat from a forge. Next to him stood Ravenna, beautiful in pale blue, her expression one of poorly concealed glee at Sloane's discomfort. "Now that everyone is assembled," Sterling said, his voice cutting through Sloane's spiraling anxiety, "we can begin." He pulled a rolled parchment from beside him and spread it flat on the table. "The marriage contract. I've had it drawn up according to my specifications." One of the advisors, an elderly man with more beard than face, leaned forward to examine the parchment. "Your Majesty, if I may, it's highly unusual to proceed with such haste. Normally we would—" "I don't care about normal." Sterling's interruption was soft but absolute. "Read the terms aloud so all parties understand them clearly." The advisor swallowed whatever protest he'd been about to make and began reading. "The marriage contract between His Majesty Sterling Greymore Alpha, King of Artoria, and Lady Sloane Thornwood, witnessed this day in the year of—" "Skip the formalities," Sterling said. "Read the actual terms." The advisor cleared his throat. "As follows: 1. His Majesty will never look upon the face of Lady Sloane. Neither he nor anyone in his household or court will be permitted to see her visage unless she grants explicit permission." Sloane's breath caught. He was putting it in the contract, making it law. She would never have to reveal her mark unless she chose to. 2. Lady Sloane will be afforded all rights and privileges of a queen consort. She will have her own household, her own income, her own staff. No one may command her save the king himself. 3. Lady Sloane's sole obligation is to provide His Majesty with an heir. Once she has successfully borne a child, she will be released from all physical obligations to the king and may live as she chooses with full royal support for the remainder of her life. The words hit Sloane like physical blows. An heir. That's what this was about. He needed a child, and for some reason he'd chosen the one woman who would never demand love or affection or anything beyond the clinical act of creating that heir. 4. In exchange for this agreement, His Majesty will immediately discharge all debts owed by Lady Sloane to her father, Lord Bancroft Thornwood. The sum of £8,500 will be paid in full before this contract is signed. Bancroft made a strangled noise. Sloane didn't have to see his face to know he was furious. He'd counted on those debts to keep her enslaved. Now they were being wiped away like they'd never existed. The advisor continued. 5. Should Lady Sloane at any point wish to dissolve this marriage, she may do so freely without penalty, retaining all titles, properties, and income granted to her as queen consort. Sloane's head spun. This wasn't a marriage contract. It was a business arrangement, cold, practical, devoid of any pretense of affection. And it was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her. Sterling finally looked at her, though of course he couldn't see her face through the heavy hood. "Are these terms acceptable to you?" Sloane's voice emerged as barely a whisper. "Your Majesty, I don't understand. Why would you offer such generous terms?" "Because I don't want a wife who feels trapped." His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "You'll be giving me what I need, an heir to secure my line. In return, I'm giving you freedom. The choice to stay or go, to reveal yourself or remain hidden, to live as you wish. That seems fair." Fair. The concept was so foreign, Sloane almost couldn't grasp it. "I have one question," she said carefully. "The contract says you'll never look at me. Does that include on the wedding night when the heir is—" "I'll be blindfolded." And Sterling's response was immediate, as if he'd anticipated the question. "The room will be dark. You'll never have to fear me seeing what you wish to keep hidden." From across the room, Bancroft's voice cut through like a rusty blade. "Your Majesty, I must protest in the strongest terms. You don't know what's under that hood." What if she's diseased? What if she's deformed? What if? I don't care. Sterling didn't even look at Bancroft. His attention remained fixed on Sloane. Lady Sloane, I'm asking you again, are these terms acceptable? Sloane thought of Thornhill Manor, of Ravenna's silver knives and her father's wolf's bane poison, of 11 years of abuse and degradation and hopelessness, of debts that multiplied like parasites designed to keep her enslaved until she died. And she thought of this contract, of freedom, of choice, of a king who asked her consent instead of taking what he wanted. The terms are more than acceptable, Your Majesty. Her voice was stronger now, certain. They're generous beyond measure. Then we're agreed. Sterling pulled the contract closer and signed his name in bold flowing script. Then he slid it across to Sloane along with a quill. Sloane signed with shaking hands. Her signature looked childish next to his, but it was legal nonetheless. The advisor produced a second document. The debt settlement, Your Majesty. Sterling signed that as well, then gestured to a servant standing near the door. The man came forward bearing a locked chest. Sterling produced a key from inside his jacket, opened the chest, and revealed gold coins stacked in neat rows. 8,500 pounds as agreed. He looked at Bancroft for the first time. Your debt is paid, Lord Thornwood. You have no further claim on your daughter. Bancroft's face had gone from purple to red to an alarming shade of gray. Your Majesty, surely, leave. The single word from Sterling carried enough command to make every wolf in the room straighten reflexively. Take your payment and go. If I see you at court again, or if I hear even a whisper that you've attempted to contact my wife, I will have you stripped of your title and lands. Am I clear? The threat wasn't empty. Everyone in the room could hear the absolute certainty behind it. Bancroft's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. Then he gestured sharply to Ravenna, and the two of them left the chest of gold carried between two servants. Sloane watched them go and felt something break loose inside her chest, something that had been tied down for so long she'd forgotten it was there. She was free. The advisors were dismissed. The servants sent away. Until only Sloane and Sterling remained in the vast council chamber. Sterling stood and Sloane realized again just how tall he was, how his presence seemed to fill the space around him despite his contained demeanor. The wedding will take place in 3 days, he said. That should give you time to settle in, meet with the household staff, select your personal attendants. 3 days. Sloane's mind reeled. Your Majesty, I must ask, why me? You could have anyone. A princess from a neighboring kingdom, a noble woman with a substantial dowry, someone whose face you could actually see. Why choose the one woman who? Because I knew I could never fall in love with someone I couldn't see. The words stopped Sloane's breath in her chest. Sterling continued, his voice flat and emotionless. I don't want love, Lady Sloane. I can't afford it. This arrangement suits us both. You get freedom and safety. I get an heir without the complication of emotions. There was something beneath his words, something that made Sloane think of ice over deep water, solid on the surface but concealing depths that could drown you if you fell through. I understand, Your Majesty. Do you? For the first time, something almost like doubt crossed his features. Truly, you're offering me more than anyone ever has, Sloane said simply. I won't question your reasons. I'll simply be grateful for your generosity. Sterling studied her, or rather studied the hooded figure that concealed her, for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked her to her core. He smiled. It wasn't a large smile, barely a quirk of his lips, really, but it transformed his face from austere and cold to something almost human. 3 days, then. If you need anything before the wedding, tell Miriam. She'll make sure you have it. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. And Sloane? Thank you for agreeing to this. Then he was gone, and Sloane was alone in the council chamber, with her thoughts and a future that seemed impossible. She lifted one hand to her hood, touching the fabric that concealed her mark. Sterling would never see it, would never know what she was, would never look at her with the disgust and fear she'd seen in every other face when they learned the truth. For the first time in 11 years, Sloane allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. She had no idea how wrong she was. The wedding took place on the 3rd day, just as Sterling had promised. Sloane stood in her chambers as Miriam and 2 other attendants helped her into the bridal gown. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache, ivory silk that pooled around her feet like spilled cream, embroidered with silver thread in patterns of wolves and moonlight. The sleeves were long and fitted the neckline modest. Everything about it was designed to be worn with a heavy cloak that would conceal her completely. You look lovely, my lady, Miriam said softly, adjusting the fall of fabric over Sloane's shoulders. Like a queen. Sloane touched the thick veil that covered her face, layer upon layer of ivory silk so dense that even up close, no one could make out her features. Beneath it, the black cross on her forehead seemed to burn. "I don't feel like a queen," she whispered. "Give it time." Miriam's smile was kind. "His Majesty is different, but he's a good man. You'll see." Sloane wanted to believe that. In the 3 days since the contract signing, she'd seen glimpses that suggested Miriam might be right. Sterling had sent gifts books since somehow he'd learned she could read. Fine paper and ink, a music box that played a haunting melody. Small things that showed he'd paid attention to details she hadn't even realized she'd revealed. But they hadn't spoken again. Hadn't seen each other, except in passing, when Sterling would nod to her in the corridor and continue on his way. He was giving her space, she realized. Time to adjust. Tonight, that distance would end. The walk to the Cathedral of the Moon blurred together. Sloane remembered stone corridors and curious faces, the weight of the gown, the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears beneath the veil. And then she was standing at the cathedral entrance alone. No father to give her away. She'd insisted on that. Bancroft Thornwood had surrendered all rights to her the moment he'd accepted Sterling's gold. The cathedral doors opened. Inside, hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows on ancient stone walls. The pews were filled with nobles and courtiers, all turned to watch her entrance. And at the altar, standing perfectly still in black formal attire, was Sterling. Sloane forced herself to walk forward. One step, another. The aisle seemed to stretch for miles. As she drew closer, she could see Sterling more clearly. His pale gold hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp planes of his face. His gray eyes were fixed on her, or rather, on the veiled figure approaching him. His expression was unreadable, but even from 10 feet away, Sloane could feel it. The cold. It radiated from him like winter frost, dropping the temperature of the air around him by degrees. She'd felt it that first night at the auction, but here in the cathedral, it was even more pronounced. Alphas weren't supposed to be cold. Their blood ran hot, their body temperature elevated by the wolf inside them. It was one of the fundamental truths of their nature. Sterling defied that truth with every breath. Sloane reached the altar and stood beside him. Up close, the cold was almost overwhelming, like standing next to a block of ice. The priest began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the vaulted space. Sloane heard the words but couldn't focus on them. All her attention was fixed on the man beside her, this stranger who'd bought her freedom, who'd offered her impossible kindness, who now stood so still, he might have been carved from marble. "Do you, Sterling Greymore, Alpha King of Artoria, take this woman to be your wife, your queen, your mate?" "I do." His voice was steady, emotionless. The priest turned to Sloane. "And do you, Sloane Thornwood, take this man to be your husband, your king, your mate?" Through the layers of veil, Sloane's voice emerged quiet but clear. "I do." The rings. An attendant stepped forward with a velvet cushion bearing 2 rings, as one large, one small. Sterling took the smaller ring and for the first time reached for Sloane's hand. Even through her glove, his touch was cold. Not cool, not chilled, cold, like pressing her palm to a frozen lake. He slid the ring onto her finger with gentle precision. The metal was warm compared to his skin. Sloane took the larger ring with trembling hands and reached for Sterling's hand. He'd removed his glove, and when her fingers touched his bare skin, she nearly gasped. Ice. His skin was literally ice cold. She forced herself to steady her shaking and slid the ring onto his finger. His hand was large, the fingers long and elegant and so cold she could barely stand to touch him. The priest smiled. "By the power vested in me, and before these witnesses, I now pronounce you husband and wife, alpha and queen mates, bound by sacred vow." The claiming. They needed to verbally claim each other, since the physical claiming, the bite that would mark them as mated, would require Sloane to bare her neck, reveal her skin. Sterling turned to face her fully. Through the veil, she could see the gray of his eyes, clear and cold as winter sky. "I claim you as mine," he said, his voice carrying through the cathedral. "My wife, my queen, my mate." The words were formal, ritualistic, but something in the way he said mine made Sloane's breath catch. "I claim you as mine," she echoed, her voice softer. "My husband, my king, my mate." She felt no snap of the mate bond, no overwhelming pull or certainty. That would come later in private when they completed the physical claiming. If they completed it. The priest beamed. "You may kiss your bride, your majesty." The cathedral went silent. Every person in attendance leaned forward slightly, waiting to see what would happen. Would the king lift the veil? Would they finally see the mysterious queen's face? Sterling didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly he reached for Sloane's hand again. He lifted it to his lips and pressed a kiss to her gloved knuckles. The kiss was gentle, formal. His lips were as cold as the rest of him, and even through the fabric of her gloves, Sloane felt the chill of it. It wasn't what anyone expected. The crowd murmured in confusion and disappointment. But Sloane stood frozen, staring at the place where Sterling's mouth had touched her hand. He'd respected her wish to remain hidden. Even here, with hundreds of witnesses expecting tradition to be followed, he'd chosen to honor her boundaries instead. "Thank you," Sloane whispered so quietly only he could hear. Sterling's gray eyes met hers through the veil. "I made you a promise," he said just as quietly. "I intend to keep it." Then he turned to face the assembled crowd, still holding Sloane's hand in his ice-cold grip. "Your queen," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. The nobles rose and bowed. Some looked confused, others scandalized. But none dared question the Alpha King's choice. Sloane stood beside her new husband and felt the weight of hundreds of gazes on her veiled face. But beneath the fear and uncertainty, there was something else. The first fragile thread of trust beginning to form. The wedding feast was an ordeal. Sloane sat at the high table beside Sterling, surrounded by nobles and courtiers who pretended not to stare while doing exactly that. Servants brought course after course of elaborate food, roasted meats, delicate pastries, fruits arranged in artistic displays. Sloane couldn't eat any of it. The veil made it impossible, and she wasn't about to lift it in front of hundreds of witnesses. Sterling noticed. Of course he did. He leaned close enough that the cold radiating from him made Sloane shiver and said quietly, "You don't have to stay for the entire feast. It's traditional, but I think we can dispense with the tradition given the circumstances." "I don't want to seem rude," Sloane whispered back. "You're the queen. You can do as you please." There was the faintest hint of something in his voice. Not quite humor, but close. "Besides, I suspect half the court is scandalized already. Might as well give them something else to gossip about." He stood, and immediately every conversation in the hall died. "The queen and I are retiring for the evening," Sterling announced. His tone suggested this was not up for discussion. "The feast will continue without us. Enjoy yourselves." Before anyone could protest, he offered his hand to Sloane. She took it, grateful for the excuse to escape, and let him lead her from the hall. The walk back to the royal chambers was silent. Sterling's hand remained cold in hers, but Sloane was getting used to it. Or maybe the cold was simply becoming less shocking through repetition. They reached her chambers, which now adjoined his in truth, not just in name, and Sterling stopped at the door. "I'll give you an hour," he said, "to prepare yourself. And Sloane—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know this isn't a normal wedding night. I know the contract makes it clear this is purely for the purpose of conceiving an heir. But I want you to know I won't hurt you. I'll be as gentle as I can." The consideration in his voice made Sloane's throat tight. "I know," she managed. "I trust you." It was true, she realized with some surprise. She did trust him. This man, who was still essentially a stranger, had shown her more kindness in 3 days than her own father had in 24 years. Sterling nodded and left her alone. Sloane entered her chambers to find Miriam waiting with a knowing smile and a nightgown of the finest silk Sloane had ever seen. It was ivory, nearly transparent, with delicate lace at the neckline and wrists. "For tonight, my lady," Miriam said gently. His Majesty was very specific about the arrangements. "The room will be completely dark. He'll wear a blindfold as promised. You needn't fear being seen." Sloane's hands shook as Miriam helped her out of the wedding gown and into the nightgown. The silk whispered against her skin, so light it felt like wearing air. "Will it hurt?" The question escaped before Sloane could stop it. She immediately felt foolish. She was 24, not some ignorant child. But her knowledge of such matters was purely theoretical. Miriam's expression softened. "The first time can be uncomfortable," she said honestly. "But His Majesty is, well, he has a reputation for being considerate. I suspect he'll make it as easy for you as possible." That should have been comforting. Instead, it just made Sloane more nervous. Miriam finished arranging Sloane's hair. She'd removed the veil since they were alone and stepped back. "You look beautiful, my lady. Truly." Sloane caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Without the hood and veil, she looked almost normal. Young, nervous. If not for the black cross marking her forehead, she might have passed for any other new bride. But the cross was there, would always be there. A permanent reminder of what she was. A knock at the adjoining door made both women turn. "That will be His Majesty," Miriam said. "I'll leave you now. Good luck, my lady." She slipped out through the main door, leaving Sloane alone. Another knock, softer this time. "Come in," Sloane called, her voice barely steady. The door opened and Sterling entered. He'd changed from his formal wedding attire into simpler clothing, black trousers and a white shirt unlaced at the throat. His pale gold hair was loose around his shoulders. In the candlelight, he looked younger somehow. Less like the ice-cold king and more like a man. A very nervous man, Sloane realized with shock. "I brought this," Sterling said, holding up a strip of black silk. "As promised, a blindfold. If you're worried I might see you even accidentally in the dark." The fact that he'd remembered that he'd thought to bring it made something warm bloom in Sloane's chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Sterling nodded. "I'll turn around while you extinguish the candles and get settled. Just tell me when you're ready." He turned his back and Sloane hurried to blow out the candles positioned around the room. One by one the flames died until only a single candle remained on the nightstand beside the bed. Sloane climbed into the bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, and took a shaking breath. "I'm ready." She heard Sterling move in the darkness, heard fabric rustling as he tied the blindfold around his eyes. Then his footsteps approached the bed, slow and careful. "I'm going to extinguish the last candle now," he said quietly. "Are you certain you're ready?" "Yes." The room plunged into absolute darkness. For a moment there was only silence and the sound of Sloane's racing heart. Then she felt the bed dip as Sterling sat on the edge of it. "May I touch you?" His voice came from just a few feet away, quiet and careful. "Yes." His hand found her shoulder through the silk nightgown, and even through the fabric, the cold of his skin made her gasp. "I'm sorry," Sterling said, immediately starting to pull away. "I know it's unpleasant. The cold. I've always been this way." "No, it's—" Sloane caught his hand before he could withdraw completely. "It's just surprising. I'm not rejecting you." She felt him relax slightly. His hand remained on her shoulder, and slowly she felt her body adjusting to the temperature. It was still cold, but not unbearable. Just different. "The contract says we need to conceive an heir," Sterling said, his voice low in the darkness. "But that doesn't mean I have to be cruel about it. Tell me if anything I do hurts or frightens you. I'll stop immediately." "I will," Sloane promised. Sterling's hand moved slowly from her shoulder down her arm, tracing the shape of her through the silk. His touch was gentle, exploratory, learning the contours of someone he couldn't see. "You're warm," he said, something almost like wonder in his voice. "I can feel it even through the fabric." "And you're cold," Sloane replied, "like touching ice." "Does it bother you?" Sloane considered. "No," she said truthfully. "It's strange, but not bad, just different from what I expected." She felt Sterling shift closer on the bed, felt the cold radiating from him more strongly now that there was less distance between them. "I'm going to kiss you out," he said, "if that's all right." Before Sloane could answer, she felt his lips brush against hers. The cold shocked through her like lightning. His mouth was ice frost winter condensed into a single point of contact. But beneath the cold was something else, gentleness. Care. He kissed her like she was something precious that might break if handled roughly. Sloane found herself leaning into the kiss despite the cold. Her hands came up to rest on his chest, and through the thin fabric of his shirt, she could feel the solid muscle beneath. Cold, yes, but undeniably real. The kiss deepened slowly. Sterling's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. His fingers traced the shape of her jaw, her neck, learning her features through touch alone. Sloane waited for him to move higher, to feel the cross on her forehead. But his hand stayed carefully below that line, as if he knew instinctively where her boundaries lay. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Sterling rested his forehead against hers. The cold of his skin against hers should have been unpleasant, but somehow it wasn't. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes." Sloane's voice was barely a whisper. "Are you—" She felt rather than saw his small smile. "Yes, more than all right." His hands moved to the straps of her nightgown, fingertips barely touching. "May I—" Sloane's heart hammered. "Yes." Slowly giving her every opportunity to change her mind. Sterling slid the straps down her shoulders. The silk whispered against her skin as the nightgown fell away, pooling around her waist. The cold air made her shiver, and then Sterling's hands were on her bare skin, and she gasped at the temperature. Ice-cold palms against her ribs, her waist, her back. "Too cold?" Sterling asked, immediately starting to pull away. "No." Sloane caught his wrist, holding him in place. "No, I'm just adjusting." And she was. Her body was warming his hands, or maybe she was simply getting used to the cold. Either way, the shock was fading into something else. Something that made her breath catch and her skin prickle with awareness. Sterling's mouth found hers again, and this time the kiss was deeper, more urgent. His hands moved over her skin with increasing confidence, learning the shape of her, the dip of her waist, the curve of her ribs, the swell of her breasts. When his palm cupped her breast, Sloane made a sound she'd never heard herself make before, breathy and wanting. "Tell me if this is too much," Sterling murmured against her lips. "Tell me if you need me to stop." "Don't stop," Sloane breathed. She felt him shift, felt the bed move as he rose to remove his own clothing. The rustle of fabric in darkness. And then he was back, and there was nothing between them but air and darkness. His body was a study in contrast. Hard muscle, soft skin, and everywhere that bone-deep cold that should have been repellent, but somehow made Sloane want to press closer as if she could warm him through proximity alone. They came together slowly. Sterling's hands guided her position, her always checking with soft questions. "Is this all right? Does this hurt? Tell me if you need me to stop." When he finally pressed into her, there was a sharp moment of discomfort that made Sloane tense. Sterling froze immediately. "Breathe," he said softly. "Just breathe for me." Sloane forced herself to take deep breaths, and gradually the discomfort faded into something else. Fullness, connection, heat meeting cold in the darkness. Sterling moved carefully, slowly, letting her adjust to the sensation. His hands stroked her sides, her back, soothing and gentling her through the strangeness of it. And then something shifted. The discomfort receded, and Sloane found herself moving with him, matching his rhythm. Her hands gripped his shoulders, feeling the play of muscle beneath cold skin. Her breath came faster. "That's it," Sterling murmured. "You're doing beautifully." The praise made something warm unfurl in Sloane's chest. When had anyone last told her she'd done something well? The rhythm built, and Sloane felt something gathering inside her. Some pressure that grew and grew until she thought she might shatter from it. And then Sterling's hand slipped between them, touched her in a place that made her cry out, and the pressure broke like a dam bursting. Sloane shook apart in the darkness, her fingers digging into Sterling's shoulders, sounds escaping her that she couldn't control. And through it all, Sterling held her, moved with her whispered praise and encouragement until the waves finally subsided. He followed her over the edge moments later, his body going rigid, his breath catching in something that might have been her name. Then they were both still, both breathing hard in the darkness, still connected. Sterling withdrew carefully and rolled to the side, pulling Sloane with him, so she was tucked against his cold chest. His arm came around her waist, holding her close. They lay like that for a long time, not speaking. Sterling's fingers traced idle patterns on her shoulder, and Sloane listened to his heartbeat, slow and steady, and somehow colder than it should be. "Thank you," Sterling said finally, his voice quiet in the darkness. "For tonight, for being patient with me." Sloane turned her head to look at where she thought his face was, though of course she could see nothing. "I should be thanking you. You were kind, gentle, more than I had any right to expect." "You have every right to expect kindness," Sterling said, and there was something almost fierce in his voice. "Don't ever think otherwise." Sloane felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had defended her right to basic decency? Sterling's hand found her face in the darkness, his cold thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Sleep," he said softly. "I'll stay until you do." "You don't have to leave," Sloane whispered. "The contract says—" "I know what the contract says." Sterling's voice was gentle. "But I find I don't want to leave. Not yet. If that's all right with you." "It's more than all right." Sloane felt him shift, is settling more comfortably into the bed, his arm tightening around her waist. The cold that had shocked her at first was almost comforting now. Different from anything she'd known, but not bad. Just Sterling. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, safe in the darkness, held by a man who'd given her the most precious gift imaginable. Freedom. Sloane woke to find sunlight streaming through the windows and Sterling gone. For a moment, panic gripped her. Had he seen her face while she slept? But no, the room was bright with morning light, and if he'd been here when dawn broke, he would have left immediately to honor his promise. On the pillow beside her was a single white rose and a note in elegant handwriting. "You were sleeping so peacefully, I didn't want to wake you. Thank you for last night. I hope it wasn't too terrible an ordeal." As Sloane picked up the rose, brought it to her nose, and breathed in its scent. Not terrible at all, she thought. Almost wonderful. The door to her chambers opened and Miriam entered with her usual cheerful efficiency. "Good morning, Your Majesty. How are you feeling?" Your Majesty. It still didn't sound real. "I'm well," Sloane said, pulling the covers up to ensure her face remained hidden until Miriam looked away. "Very well, actually." Miriam's smile was knowing. "His Majesty asked me to inform you that you're welcome to join him for breakfast in his private dining room. Or if you prefer, I can have something brought to your chambers." The thought of eating alone in her rooms, as she'd done for the past 3 days, suddenly seemed unbearable. I'll join him. Just give me a moment to make myself presentable. Of course, Your Majesty. 20 minutes later, Sloane stood outside Sterling's private dining room hood, securely in place, hard hammering with nervousness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. She knocked softly. Come in. Sterling sat at a small table laid for two, steam rising from plates of food. He stood when Sloane entered, and something in his expression, a softness she hadn't seen before, made her breath catch. Good morning, he said. I hope you slept well. I did. Thank you for the rose. It was thoughtful. Sterling's smile was small but genuine. I'm glad you liked it. Please sit. I wasn't sure what you preferred for breakfast, so I had them bring a bit of everything. Sloane sat and Sterling returned to his own chair. For a moment, they sat in silence, and Sloane realized the problem: she couldn't eat with her hood on, and Sterling couldn't leave the room every time she needed to take a bite. I should go, she said quietly. This was foolish of me. I can't. Wait. Sterling rose and moved to the windows, drawing the heavy curtains closed until the room was dim. Then he pulled the blindfold from his pocket, the same one from last night, and tied it around his eyes. There, now you can eat in peace. Sloane stared at him. He'd thought of everything, planned for this. With trembling hands, she pushed back her hood and began to eat. The food was delicious, but she barely tasted it. All her attention was on the man across from her, blindfolded, in his own dining room, so she could have a meal in comfort. Tell me about yourself, Sterling said after a few minutes. I realize I know almost nothing about you beyond what was in your father's records. Sloane swallowed her bite of bread. There's not much to tell. I was a servant in my father's house. I worked in the kitchens, did laundry, scrubbed floors. That was my life. But before that, Sterling's voice was gentle. Gentle. You must have had a childhood, interests, dreams. Had she? It was hard to remember a time before everything changed. I like to read, Sloane said slowly. My mother taught me before she died. I used to sneak books from my father's library and read them in secret. What kinds of books? Anything I could find: history, poetry, old legends about wolves and magic. She paused. I probably shouldn't admit to reading about magic. Why not? Sterling sounded genuinely curious. Magic is real. Pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. It was such a simple statement, but it made Sloane's chest tight. Her father had treated her magic like a disease, a shameful secret to be hidden and suppressed. Sterling spoke of it like it was just another fact of the world. What about you? Sloane asked, eager to turn the conversation away from herself. What does a king do with his free time? Sterling was quiet for a moment. I don't have much free time, he admitted. Running a kingdom is demanding, but when I do have a spare hour, I like to walk in the gardens or sit in the library, quiet places where I can think. That sounds lonely. It is. The admission was so soft, Sloane almost missed it. But I've always been alone, even surrounded by people. So I've learned to prefer it. There was something in his voice, not quite pain, but close to it, a weariness that spoke of years carrying burdens alone. You don't have to be alone anymore, Sloane said before she could stop herself. I mean, if you want company, I'm here, as your wife. Sterling's hand found hers across the table, his cold fingers wrapping around her warm ones. I think I'd like that, he said quietly. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, and when Sloane finally pulled her hood back up and Sterling removed his blindfold, something had shifted between them. The contract had been about practicality, about an heir and freedom and mutual benefit. But sitting across from Sterling in the dimmed room, Sloane realized with dawning wonder that she actually liked him. And from the small smile on Sterling's face as he held the door for her, she suspected he might like her too. It was the most dangerous thing that could happen to either of them. They just didn't know it yet. The weeks that followed established a pattern that Sloane had never imagined possible. Sterling came to her chambers every night, not just for the clinical purpose of conceiving an heir, though that was certainly part of it. He came to talk, to sit in the darkness with her and share pieces of himself that Sloane suspected few others ever saw. She learned that he hated formal court functions, but attended them anyway because duty demanded it. That he'd taught himself to read 5 languages because late-night studying gave him something to do when sleep wouldn't come. That he'd been trained to fight since he could walk, and the scars on his body which Sloane had felt in the darkness were testament to how seriously his father had taken that training. And she learned about the cold. It's always been this way, Sterling told her one night, 3 weeks into their marriage. They lay tangled together in her bed, the darkness absolute, his cold skin pressed against her warmth. From birth, my father was the same, and his father before him. Every king of the Greymore line for 200 years has been like ice. But why? Sloane's fingers traced idle patterns on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. Alphas run hot. It's part of our nature. I know. There was frustration in Sterling's voice. The healers have never been able to explain it. They call it a family condition, something in our blood that makes us different. Sloane thought about that. A family condition that affected every king for 200 years. That sounded less like a medical issue and more like magic, she whispered. Sterling went still beneath her touch. What? It sounds like magic. A curse, maybe. Something that's been passed down through your bloodline. If it's a curse, no one's ever been able to break it. Sterling's voice was flat. Believe me, my father tried. Spent a fortune on healers and witches and anyone who claimed they could cure him. Nothing worked. Is it painful? No, just cold and lonely. He paused. Until you. Sloane's breath caught. What do you mean? When I'm with you, I feel less cold, like there's warmth trying to break through. His hand found hers in the darkness, threading their fingers together. I don't know if you've noticed, but my temperature rises slightly when we're touching. Sloane had noticed. The first night his skin had been like ice. Now after weeks of contact, it was more like cold stone, still well below normal, but not quite as shocking. Maybe I'm warming you up, she said, trying for lightness. Maybe you are. Sterling pulled her closer, his lips finding her temple. I know the contract said this was just for an heir, but I find myself looking forward to these nights. To talking with you, being with you. Is that all right? The vulnerability in his voice made Sloane's chest ache. It's more than all right. I look forward to them too. It was true. During the day, Sloane occupied herself with learning how to be a queen, studying protocol with Miriam, meeting with household staff, beginning to understand the complex web of politics and alliances that kept the kingdom running. But the nights were hers and Sterling's alone. And every night without fail, he came to her. Sometimes they made love slow and careful in the darkness, learning each other's bodies by touch alone. Other times they simply talked until one or both of them fell asleep. Sterling always stayed now, holding Sloane through the night, his cold body gradually warming against hers. It was during one of these quiet conversations that Sloane first dared to share something real about herself. Can I tell you something? She asked one night, her head resting on Sterling's chest. Something I've never told anyone. Anything. I didn't kill Blake Aldford. Sterling's hand, which had been stroking her hair, paused for just a moment before resuming. Your former betrothed, the one who died in the fire. Everyone thinks I did it, that I lost control of my magic and burned him alive out of jealousy. Sloane's voice was barely a whisper. But I didn't. I was angry, yes. Hurt that he loved my sister instead of me. But I didn't kill him. I know. Sloane lifted her head, wishing she could see Sterling's face in the darkness. How can you know that? Because I know you. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. You're gentle, kind. You bring crumbs to the birds in the garden when you think no one's watching. You thank the servants for tasks they're paid to do. You couldn't kill someone in cold blood. My magic was sealed when I was 13. Sloane continued, the words spilling out now that she'd started. My father had it done the moment fire manifested. So even if I'd wanted to hurt Blake, which I didn't, I couldn't have. The seal on my forehead prevents me from accessing any power. The mark you hide, Sterling said softly. That's what it is, a sealing mark. A witch mark. It brands me as dangerous. Criminal. Sloane's throat tightened. That's why I can never show my face. The moment anyone sees it, they'll know what I am. Sterling was quiet for a long moment. Then, would you show me? Sloane's breath stopped. What? Your face, the mark. Would you let me see it? Not now. I know I promised never to look at you, but maybe you could describe it to me, so I can understand what you're hiding. The request was so gentle, so careful, that Sloane found herself considering it. She'd never described the mark to anyone, never put into words what it looked like, only what it meant. It's a cross, she said slowly, black as pitch, about 2 inches tall, centered on my forehead, just above my eyebrows. The lines are thick, like they were burned into my skin. She paused. Which I suppose they were in a way. Magic leaves marks. Does it hurt? Not anymore. It did during the sealing ritual. I thought I was going to die from the pain. Sloane shuddered at the memory. But now it's just there. A permanent reminder of what I am. A witch, Sterling said, not a question, not an accusation. just a statement of fact. Yes. And the fire magic before it was sealed, what was it like? No one had ever asked her that before. They'd been too busy being horrified or afraid or disgusted. Beautiful, Sloane whispered. It felt like sunlight in my veins, warm and bright and alive. When it manifested, I could make flames dance in my palm, little sparks of red and gold that responded to my emotions. She smiled at the memory. I used to practice in secret making shapes with the fire, animals, flowers, silly things. That doesn't sound dangerous. My father thought it was. He said magic was an abomination, that it needed to be controlled, suppressed, eliminated. Sloane's voice hardened, but I think he was just afraid of something he couldn't understand or control. Sterling's arms tightened around her. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. The words came out more bitter than Sloane intended. Everyone else is. I'm not everyone else. Sterling shifted, rolling them so he was braced above her, though of course he still couldn't see her in the darkness. And I think your magic sounds like a gift, not a curse. I'm sorry it was taken from you. Sloane felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for saying that, for believing me about Blake, for everything. Sterling lowered his head and kissed her, and Sloane tasted salt on his lips from her own tears. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened into something more urgent, more desperate. They made love with an intensity that surprised them both, hands clutching breath, mingling, moving together like they were trying to fuse into one person. And when it was over, when they lay gasping and trembling in the aftermath, Sterling said something that changed everything. I'm starting to care for you. More than I should. More than is safe. Sloane's heart stuttered. What do you mean more than is safe? But Sterling had already pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin, and his breathing had evened out into the pattern of sleep. Sloane lay awake for a long time wondering what he'd meant, wondering why caring for her could be dangerous. She had no idea how right she was to worry. The first sign of trouble came on a morning in the 5th week of their marriage. Sloane woke alone as always. Sterling left before dawn to maintain the illusion that he never saw her face. But on the pillow beside her was not the usual rose and note. Instead, there was just a note, and the handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. Forgive me for not coming to breakfast. I'm unwell. Don't worry, just a headache. I'll see you tonight. Sloane stared at the note, unease prickling down her spine. Sterling never got sick. In 5 weeks, she'd never heard him so much as sneeze. She dressed quickly, pulling on her hood, and went in search of Miriam. Has His Majesty seen the healers? She asked when she found the head of household in the kitchens. Miriam looked up from the menu she'd been planning, concern flickering across her face. He refused, Your Majesty, said it was nothing serious and they shouldn't fuss over a simple headache. That doesn't sound like him. No, Miriam agreed slowly. It doesn't. Sloane spent the day trying to occupy herself with queenly duties, but her mind kept drifting to Sterling. Something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it, just a growing sense of dread that tightened her chest with every passing hour. When night finally fell and she returned to her chambers, she found Sterling already waiting. He sat in the chair by the window, still fully dressed, his face pale in the candlelight. When he looked up at her entrance, Sloane saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Pain. Sterling, she hurried to his side. What's wrong? You look terrible. I'm fine. But his voice was strained, and when Sloane reached for his hand, she found it even colder than usual. Ice cold. Frost cold. You're not fine. Let me call the healers. No. Sterling's grip on her hand tightened. No healers. It's nothing. It will pass. What will pass? Sloane knelt beside his chair, searching his face. Please talk to me. What's happening? Sterling was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you remember what I said last night about caring for you more than I should? Yes. I need to tell you something I should have told you before we married. He took a shaky breath. The cold in my family, it's not just a medical condition. It's a curse. A very old, very powerful curse. Sloane's breath caught. What kind of curse? 200 years ago, one of my ancestors, King Aldrich III, wanted to ensure that the kings of Artoria would never be swayed by emotion, never make decisions based on love or affection or anything that might compromise their duty to the kingdom. Sterling's voice was flat, reciting facts he'd clearly memorized long ago. So he sought out a powerful witch and asked her to cast a spell, a curse that would make it impossible for any king of his bloodline to feel love. That's monstrous. Yes, but Aldrich thought it was necessary, thought it would make his descendants stronger, better rulers. Sterling laughed bitterly. The witch warned him that curses always have a price, that he might not like what he'd bought, but he insisted. What was the price? Sterling met her eyes, and in his gaze, Sloane saw despair. The curse worked. Every king of my line has been incapable of feeling love. Our hearts are literally frozen. That's why we're so cold. We can't feel warmth, can't feel affection, can't bond properly with mates. He paused. And if we ever do somehow manage to fall in love despite the curse, we die. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Die? Sloane's voice came out as barely a whisper. How about the ice spreads? It starts in the heart and works outward, freezing us from the inside out. Sterling pulled his shirt open, and in the candlelight, Sloane saw it. A patch of frost on his chest directly over his heart. Thin white crystals spreading across his skin like a disease. No, Autumn. Sloane reached for it with shaking hands. The frost was cold even to her touch, colder than Sterling's normal temperature. No, this can't be happening. It started 2 days ago, Sterling said quietly. Just a small patch. But it's growing, spreading. Because of me. Horror crashed over Sloane. Because you're falling in love with me. Because I've already fallen in love with you. Sterling caught her hands, held them against the frost on his chest. I tried not to. I chose you specifically because I thought I could never love someone I couldn't see. But I was wrong. I fell in love with your voice, your kindness, your strength, the way you laugh when you think no one can hear. I love everything about you, Sloane, and it's killing me. Sloane felt tears streaming down her face beneath her hood. Then stop. Stop loving me. Please, if it will save your life. I can't. Sterling's smile was sad. That's the cruelest part of the curse. Once it starts, it can't be undone. Love isn't something you can simply turn off. There has to be a cure, some way to break the curse. Do you think I haven't looked? Frustration bled into Sterling's voice. My father died of this curse when I was 10 years old. He fell in love with my mother somehow, against all odds, and the ice killed him within 3 months. I watched him die, watched the frost spread until it covered his entire body, and his heart simply stopped. And no one found a cure. No one. The witch who cast the curse is long dead. And even if we could find her breaking a curse this old, this powerful, Sterling shook his head, it would take magic beyond anything available in this kingdom. Sloane stared at the frost on Sterling's chest, her mind racing. Magic beyond anything available in this kingdom. But what about magic that was sealed, locked away but still present? What if she stopped the idea half-formed and terrifying? Sloane took a shaking breath. What if I could break the seal on my magic? What if I could access my firepower? Fire melts ice. Maybe. No. Sterling's voice was sharp. Absolutely not. Breaking a seal is incredibly dangerous. It could kill you or drive you mad or it could save you. Sloane gripped his hands tighter. Sterling, I can't just sit here and watch you die. If there's even a chance, I won't risk you. Sterling pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, despite the cold radiating from his chest. I chose this. I knew the risks when I started caring for you. But I don't regret it. These weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. Don't. Sloane pressed her face against his shoulder. Don't talk like you're already dead. I'm not dead yet. Sterling's hand stroked her hair. And I intend to spend whatever time I have left making you happy, making sure you're taken care of. The contract ensures you'll be protected even after I'm gone. I don't care about the contract. The words burst out of Sloane with surprising vehemence. I care about you. She stopped, the realization crashing over her like a wave. I love you too. Sterling went very still. What? I love you. Sloane pulled back enough to look at his face, wishing desperately that she could remove her hood, let him see the truth in her eyes. I didn't mean to. I know it wasn't part of our agreement, but I fell in love with you anyway. With your gentleness and your strength and the way you make me feel safe for the first time in my life. Oh, Sloane, Sterling's voice broke. You shouldn't. I know, but I do. She cupped his face in her hands, feeling the cold of his skin. So I'm not going to let you die. I'm going to find a way to break this curse, even if it means breaking my seal and risking everything. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm choosing. Sloane pulled him down for a kiss, pouring everything she felt into it. You gave me my freedom. Now let me give you yours. When they finally broke apart, Sterling was crying silent tears that froze on his cheeks before they could fall. He asked, how do you even begin to break a seal that's been in place for 11 years? I don't know yet, Sloane admitted, but I know someone who might. Someone who knows more about magic than anyone in this kingdom. Sloane thought of the records she'd been reading in the Royal Library, of the names that appeared again and again in histories of magical practitioners. One name in particular. There's a witch, she said slowly, an earth witch named Alara. She lives in the neighboring kingdom, but she's supposed to be one of the most powerful magical practitioners alive. If anyone knows how to break a seal or a curse, it would be her. Sterling was quiet for a long moment. Then, sending for her could take days, weeks even. I don't know if I have that much time. The frost on his chest had spread since Sloane had arrived. Now it covered an area the size of her palm, white and deadly. Then we'll send riders tonight, Sloane said. The fastest horses, messages with the royal seal. We'll offer her whatever she wants, gold land titles, if she'll just come. And if she refuses, she won't. Sloane infused her voice with a confidence she didn't feel. She can't. We'll make her understand how important this is. Sterling pulled her close again, and they sat like that for a long time. Eventually, he carried her to the bed, and they made love with a desperate intensity, like they were trying to memorize each other. To burn the memory of this into their skin so deeply, it could never be erased. And when it was over, when they lay tangled together in the darkness, Sloane felt Sterling's hand drift up to her face. May I, he asked softly, just this once. Sloane knew what he was asking, permission to feel the mark on her forehead, to touch the secret she'd kept hidden from everyone. Yes, she whispered. Sterling's cold fingers traced up her face, over her cheek, her nose, her eyebrows. And then he found it. The raised cross on her forehead, the brand that marked her as a criminal. His fingers traced the shape of it gently, reverently. It's just a scar, he said softly, just skin slightly raised from the rest. It doesn't make you monstrous, Sloane. It doesn't make you less. The world doesn't see it that way. Then the world is wrong. Sterling's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing over the mark. I wish I could see you, really see you. I imagine you're beautiful. I'm not you, Darnhunt. You are. His certainty brooked no argument. I can feel it. In the shape of your face, the sound of your voice, the goodness in your heart. You're beautiful, Sloane, and I'm grateful for every moment I've had with you. They fell asleep like that, Sterling's hand still on her face, the frost on his chest spreading slowly but inexorably toward his heart. And in the morning when Sloane woke to find him gone, and the usual note on her pillow, there was an addition at the bottom. Thank you for loving me. It's worth dying for. Sloane crumpled the note in her fist and made a decision. She wasn't going to wait for messengers and permission and diplomatic channels. She was going to save Sterling, herself, no matter what it cost her. The confrontation came 3 days later. 3 days of watching the frost spread across Sterling's chest like death creeping forward, 1 inch at a time. 3 days of messengers racing toward the neighboring kingdom with urgent pleas for the Earth Witch Alara. 3 days of Sterling growing colder, paler, weaker. Sloane couldn't wait any longer. She stood in the council chamber, hood in place, hands steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins. Before her stood Bancroft Thornwood, summoned under royal seal. He couldn't refuse. Behind him, 10 guards lined the walls, witnesses to whatever truth emerged today. And beside Sloane, against all protocol, stood her half-sister Elowyn. Ravenna's younger sister had arrived at the castle 2 days ago, travel-worn and desperate, clutching a leather-bound journal to her chest like a shield. I found this in Father's study, Elowyn had whispered, pressing it into Sloane's hands. Read it, please. You need to know the truth. Sloane had read it, every damning word. Now Bancroft stood before her, purple-faced with rage at being summoned like a common criminal. Your Majesty, he said, the title dripping with contempt. I don't know what lies my daughter has been spreading, but you demand nothing. Sterling's voice cut through the room like a blade. He sat in his throne, looking every inch the king, despite the frost now visible at his collar. You will answer the queen's questions. Truthfully. Sloane stepped forward. Did you seal my magic when I was 13 years old? Bancroft's jaw worked. Yes, you were dangerous, uncontrolled. And 6 years ago, did Blake Aldford die in a fire at Thornhill Manor? Everyone knows he did. You killed him. Did I? Sloane's voice was steady. How could I kill anyone with fire magic when you'd sealed my power 5 years earlier? Silence crashed through the chamber. Bancroft's face went from purple to gray. You, the seal, must have weakened. You must have, liar. Elowyn's voice rang out clear and strong. She stepped forward, holding up the journal. I found this hidden in your private chambers, Father. Your diary, the one where you recorded everything. She opened it to a marked page and began to read aloud. Tonight I eliminated the problem of Blake Aldford. The boy thought he could run away with Elowyn, dishonor our family by breaking Sloane's betrothal. I use the fire magic inherited from my mother, the power I've hidden all my life, to burn him alive. Let them think Sloane did it. Let them fear her. It gives me the perfect excuse to mark her as dangerous, to keep her enslaved forever." The guards stirred. Murmurs rippled through the room. Bancroft lunged for the journal, but two guards caught him. That's forgery," she fabricated. "There's more," Elowen continued, her voice shaking but determined. "My mother Isabel was a witch. My father killed her when he discovered it, but the magic passed to me regardless. I've spent my whole life hiding it, blaming others for having what I possess. When Sloane manifested fire at 13, I saw my chance. Seal her power, blame my wife's supposed affair, kill two birds with one stone. No one would ever suspect I carried the witch blood myself." "Lies," Bancroft roared. "All lies. I am a lord of this kingdom. You cannot—" "Show them," Sterling said quietly. "Show them your power, Lord Thornwood. If you have no magic, you have nothing to fear." Bancroft went very still. "That's what I thought." Sterling rose from his throne, and despite his weakened state, he radiated absolute authority. "You killed an innocent man. You framed your own daughter. You murdered your wife to hide your shame, and you enslaved Sloane for 11 years based on lies." He turned to the guards. "Seize him." As they dragged Bancroft away, screaming protests and curses, Elowen approached Sloane with trembling hands. She held out a small silver ring. "This is the seal," she said softly. "The one father used to bind your magic. I found it in his safe. I thought you should have it. In case you ever wanted to." Sloane took the ring, feeling the hum of old magic in the metal. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing me, for finding the truth." "I should have believed you 6 years ago," Elowen said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, sister." Before Sloane could respond, the chamber doors burst open. A woman strode in, ancient and powerful, her gray hair bound in intricate braids, her eyes sharp as broken glass. She moved with the steady confidence of someone who'd walked the earth for 7 decades and feared nothing it could throw at her. "I am Alara," she announced, "Earth Witch of the Western Reaches. I received your summons." Her gaze found Sterling, assessed the frost spreading across his throat, and her expression grew grim. "And I see I arrived just in time." She turned to Sloane. "Remove your hood, girl. Let me see what we're working with." Sloane hesitated, but Sterling nodded. Slowly she pushed back the heavy fabric. Alara studied her face, her eyes lingering on the black cross marking Sloane's forehead. Then something extraordinary happened. The ancient witch's stern expression softened. Her eyes filled with tears. "Isabel," she whispered. "You have Isabel's eyes. Her face. Her gift." She reached out with shaking hands to touch Sloane's cheek. "Child, I am your great-aunt. Isabel Thornwood was my twin sister. We were separated when your grandfather discovered her magic and had her killed. I searched for her for 50 years, not knowing she was already dead." Sloane's breath caught. "My grandmother was a witch, the most powerful fire witch of her generation, and she passed that gift to your father whether he wanted it or not, and through him to you." Alara's hand moved to the cross on Sloane's forehead, her fingers tracing the mark. "This seal is old magic, cruel magic. Breaking it will hurt." "I don't care," Sloane said. "Can you do it?" Alara looked at Sterling, at the frost now creeping up his neck. "For him, for love." She smiled fierce and proud. "Yes, but you must be prepared, child. When the seal breaks, 11 years of suppressed power will flood back all at once. It will feel like burning alive. And you'll shift for the first time. Your wolf has been caged as long as your magic. Both will come roaring back together." "Will it be enough?" Sterling asked, his voice rough. "To break my curse?" "Fire melts ice," Alara said simply, "and this girl carries white flame, the rarest, most powerful fire magic in existence. If anything can burn away a 200-year-old curse, it's that." She held up the silver ring. "Are you ready, Sloane?" Sloane looked at Sterling, at the man who'd given her freedom, who'd loved her, despite every reason not to, who was dying because he couldn't stop his heart from choosing her. "I'm ready." Alara spoke words in a language older than kingdoms. The ring in her hand began to glow then, to crack fissures of light spreading across the silver like lightning. The seal on Sloane's forehead burned. She screamed. Pain exploded through every nerve, every cell, every atom of her being. It felt like her skin was splitting her bones, breaking her blood boiling. The cross on her forehead shattered into fragments of black light that dissolved into smoke. And then the power came. Fire erupted from Sloane's hands, not red, not orange, but pure white gold. It spiraled around her like a living thing, hungry and wild and beautiful. The temperature in the room spiked 20 degrees in seconds. Her wolf surged forward, no longer silenced by wolf's bane and sealed magic. Bones cracked and reformed. Her scream became a howl. The transformation took 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. When it ended, where Sloane had stood now crouched a massive white wolf. 7 feet tall at the shoulder, fur the color of fresh snow, eyes blazing purple like amethyst catching firelight. Flames of white gold danced through her fur, crowning her head like a halo. The guards fell to their knees. Alara smiled. The white wolf. The prophecy speaks of you, child, the one who would break the Ice King's curse. The white wolf turned to Sterling. He stood transfixed, staring at her with wonder, despite the frost now covering half his face. Beautiful, he whispered. You're beautiful. The wolf padded forward and pressed one massive paw against Sterling's chest directly over his heart, where the frost was thickest. White flame poured from her paw, but it didn't burn. It was warm, gentle, like sunlight on skin. The flames sank into Sterling's chest, seeking out the curse's ice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Sterling gasped. The frost began to crack, to melt. Black ice turned to water, running down his chest in rivulets that steamed when they hit the white flames. The curse fought back. Sterling convulsed, ice racing up his face, trying to reach his brain before the fire could destroy it. The white wolf pressed harder, pouring more flame, more heat, more love into the burning. The ice shattered. Sterling collapsed and the white wolf caught him, lowering him gently to the floor. She held him as the last fragments of frost melted away, as color returned to his skin, as his temperature rose for the first time in his entire life. His eyes opened, gray and clear and warm. Sloane, the white wolf, shimmered and shifted back. Sloane knelt beside him, naked and exhausted, and marked not with a black cross anymore, but with a golden flame symbol that glowed softly on her forehead. I'm here, she whispered. You're alive. The curse is broken. Sterling reached up to touch her face, the face he'd promised never to look at. She let him see her fully for the first time. You're beautiful, he said again. So beautiful it hurts to look at you. And then he pulled her down and kissed her, and his lips were warm. The trial took place 3 days later in the Grand Hall before an assembly of over 600 witnesses. Sloane sat beside Sterling on the dais, her face bare for the first time in 6 years. The golden flame mark on her forehead seemed to glow in the torchlight, no longer a brand of shame, but a symbol of power. Sterling looked like a different man. Color in his cheeks, warmth in his skin. He smiled more in 3 days than he had in 3 years. The curse was broken completely. Not just for him, but for the entire Greymore bloodline. Any children they had would be born free of the ice. But first, justice had to be served. Lord Theron was brought in first in chains. The council member who'd conspired with Bancroft, who tried to assassinate Sterling with shadow root poison. Lord Theron Ashford, Sterling announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You stand accused of high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, and attempted murder of the crown. How do you plead not guilty? Theron's voice was defiant. I acted in the kingdom's best interest. You acted in your own interest. Sloane's voice cut through his excuse. You wanted your son on the throne. You wanted power, and you were willing to kill to get it. The evidence was presented. Testimony from servants. The shadow root poison blade. Letters between Theron and Bancroft planning Sterling's death. The verdict was unanimous. Death by silver, Sterling pronounced. To be carried out at dawn tomorrow. Guards remove him. Theron was dragged away screaming. Next came Ravenna. She stood before them, beautiful and cold, her face a mask of contempt. Ravenna Thornwood, Sterling said. You poisoned the queen with silver root. You attacked her with silver knives. You attempted to cause her death through wolf's bane. How do you plead? She deserved it, Ravenna spat. She's a witch, an abomination. She is your sister. Elowen's voice rang out from the crowd, and she was innocent of every crime you blamed her for. Ravenna's composure cracked. She took everything from me. Blake loved me, but he was promised to. Her father favored her magic over my bloodline. She... Enough, Sterling's command silenced her. You are stripped of your title and lands. You will be exiled to the northern wastes for the remainder of your life. And your wolf. He gestured to Alara, who stepped forward with ancient magic humming around her hands. Will be sealed. You will live as a human, weak and mortal and alone. Ravenna screamed as Alara spoke the binding words. The magic took hold. Ravenna collapsed sobbing as her wolf went silent forever. Take her away, Sterling said quietly. Finally, Bancroft Thornwood was brought before them. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The purple rage had drained from his face, leaving only gray fear. Sterling read the charges: murder of Blake Aldford, murder of your wife, 11 years of enslavement and abuse of your daughter, fraud, conspiracy, use of forbidden magic while persecuting others for the same. How do you plead? Bancroft said nothing. Your own journal condemns you, Sloane said softly. Your own words prove your guilt. You killed an innocent man and let me bear the blame. You murdered my mother to hide your shame. You enslaved me based on lies. She stood, walked to the edge of the dais, looked down at the man who'd tormented her for 24 years. You told me I was worthless, she said, that I deserved nothing, that I should be grateful for the scraps you gave me. She touched the golden flame on her forehead. You were wrong. I am powerful. I am loved. And I am free. She turned to Sterling. I defer to my husband for sentencing. Sterling stood beside her. Bancroft Thornwood, you are stripped of all titles, lands, and wealth. Your magic will be sealed permanently, and you will spend the rest of your natural life in labor in the silver mines beneath the mountains, working the same mines that produce the silver you used to torment your daughter. He gestured to the guards. Take him away. As Bancroft was dragged from the hall, he looked at Sloane one last time. She met his gaze steadily, without flinching, without fear. Then she turned her back on him. The crowd erupted in cheers. The coronation took place the following week. The Cathedral of the Moon was filled to capacity. 2,000 people crammed into every available space, spilling out into the courtyard where they could hear but not see. Sloane walked down the aisle without a hood, without a veil. Her face bare the golden flame mark glowing softly on her forehead. She wore white and gold, her dark hair bound with diamonds, and every eye in the cathedral followed her progress. Sterling waited at the altar in formal black, and when he saw her, his smile was blinding. The high priest performed the blessing, but the most important moment came after. Sterling took the crown, delicate gold, worked to look like flames, and held it high. Then in front of 2,000 witnesses, the AlphaKing knelt. Gasps echoed through the cathedral. A king never knelt, not to anyone, but Sterling knelt before Sloane, holding the crown up to her. I kneel before the woman who saved my life, he said, his voice carrying to every corner. Before the white wolf who broke a 200-year curse. Before the queen who taught me that love is not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. He placed the crown on her head. I love you, Sloane. I am not afraid to say it. I will never be afraid again. The mate bond, which had been forming slowly over weeks, suddenly snapped fully into place. Golden light erupted from both of them, visible to everyone in the cathedral. The mating marks appeared on their necks simultaneously, not bites, but golden flames that matched the mark on Sloane's forehead. The crowd roared. Sterling rose and kissed his queen in white flame, and warmth surrounded them both, the physical manifestation of a love that had conquered death itself. 6 months later, Sloane stood in the garden, one hand resting on her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant with a son they'd already named Wyatt. The healer said he'd be born strong and healthy with his father's strength and his mother's fire. And he'd be born free. No curse, no ice, just a normal, warm, healthy child. Sterling approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her, his hands covering hers on their son. He's active today, she said, smiling as the baby kicked. Like his mother. Sterling kissed her temple right over the golden flame mark. Strong, powerful, determined. Sloane leaned back against him, marveling at his warmth. Even after 6 months, she still wasn't used to it. Sterling warm instead of cold, his skin heated by blood that flowed properly for the first time in his life. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The cold, never. His arms tightened around her. I was dying for 28 years and didn't know it. You gave me life, Sloane. Real life. She turned in his arms to face him. You gave me freedom. We saved each other. We did. He kissed her slow and sweet. And we're going to raise our son in a kingdom where magic is celebrated, not feared, where witches can practice openly, where love is strength, not weakness. Sloane looked past him at the changes they'd made. The Academy for Young Witches, where Alara taught 50 students the proper use of their gifts. The new laws Elowen had helped draft from her seat on the council, protecting those with magic from persecution. The kingdom was healing, growing, changing. All because a king with a frozen heart had chosen a witch no one wanted. I love you, Sloane said. I love you too. Sterling's smile was warm and real and free. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it. In the distance, a white wolf howled Sloane's wolf, singing to the moon. And somewhere in the castle, their son kicked again, eager to be born into a world where curses were broken and love conquered all. The veiled queen had claimed her crown, and she would never hide her face again.